the need to implement projects through PPPs, unlike the normal traditional procurement models. So that's basically what. Currently, I'm studying towards my LLB just to strengthen myself in the negotiations of these PPPs as well. Thanks very much. Great. Thank you very much for that impressive resume. Yeah, I see we have something in common in terms of UDW UKZN. So I'm looking forward to definitely hearing from you in terms of the contribution you make. Next, I'd like to ask our only lady on the panel, and we are grateful that she is with us, Ms. Rashmi Raghavan. Please go ahead and mute and introduce yourself.
Good day, colleagues, good day, panelists, and this very insightful discussion. And to all the participants that are on this conversation, I head up advanced manufacturing in a branch called Investment and Spatial Industrial Development with the private sector to do business with the state in holding their hands as they set up manufacturing facilities in the country. I am a BCom honors graduate, also from the University of Durban Westville, and recently in 2020 by Standard Bank, the top public sector leader, and this year took the award, leadership award technology, especially on the role and work that we did on COVID. Part of my work has been in the private and the public sector. So I worked for the government of India on the commercial side, then worked for Ford Motor Company, leading their government affairs and negotiating team in securing investment into the country. And with my current portfolio, I'm also part of a investment promotion and facilitation team that's responsible on the implementation of the president's investment, looking after attracting foreign direct investment into the country. And thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've been having some internet issues there, but as we spoke earlier, please feel free to redirect your discussion to your specific area of specialization. And I know there's a lot that you have to say in that respect. May I now ask Dr. Bengu to introduce himself? Please, Mr. Dr. Bengu, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, fellow panelists, colleagues on the call. Thanks to Regenesys for inviting me. I see the hand went out as me being a panelist of the National Planning Commission, a commissioner. That is actually true, but I need to state that I'm here in my capacity as CEO and founder of Alchemy Health Technologies, and I'm not representing the commission at all. Secondly, the last 2 days I've been battling cold symptoms, so please forgive me for my voice. Thank you very much. I actually trained as a medical practitioner at University of Natal, then UKZN now, and went on to do postgrad diploma in anesthetics, MBA from Wales, Cardiff, and Master of Public Health, specialized in healthcare management from Harvard School of Public Health and also the Kennedy School. I have spent most of my career in what I call the business and policy side of healthcare. And some of my major achievements was establishing a provider network department from scratch at the Metropolitan Health Group, but also was COO for clinics, hospitals, and also had some entrepreneurial experience in the pharmaceutical side. And during that period, I have had more than 15 years of what I consider to be national service, where even though I haven't been employed in public sector, but I've always sought to contribute either as part-time policy advisor or in a few occasions been asked to be part of boards. The departments I've worked with in this regard: health, science and technology, transport, and more recently, I was part of the Health Market Inquiry, a panelist which was set up by the Competition Commission to look at competition dynamics in the health sector, especially private sector. And this was supposed to be a 2-year project, but it was not 5. And I am on my second term as a commissioner in the National Planning Commission. I lead health in that regard. I have since established Alchemy Health Technologies, which has 2 components. One is the consulting side, where our clients have included the National Health Laboratory Services, Board of Health Funders Discovery, Government Employees Medical Scheme, and on the health data management side, we run a health directory of health practitioners and facilities with the aim of supporting practitioners and patients in the digitalization of health information. Regarding today's session, I think it's probably broad, but I want to anchor it in relation to what is talked about, which is the National Health Insurance Bill. I have been asked to make comments on the bill in various TV and radio stations. And the relevant part of of my comment has been that one, universal health coverage is essential, but I think the NHI bill as it stands falls far short of what can work, let alone that it has been costed properly. But what is of concern, of course, is state capacity to deliver on big projects, the issue of corruption, and I see that the role of the private sector is critical if we were to implement universal health coverage successfully. And I say this, one of the provisions of the bill is that effectively the medical scheme industry will be limited significantly in this contribution. I think that's a problem.
Doc, may I interrupt you?
Sure.
Keep the details for later. We definitely want to benefit from that. But
thank you. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks very much. It seems like we have a little conspiracy here of UDW, UKZN on this panel.
Absolutely.
But, okay, great. Thank you very much for that sort of resume. And finally, I would like to ask Mr. Chadwick to please introduce himself. If you can just unmute and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Prof, and good afternoon to all those on the workshop and fellow panelists. I'm going to keep the UKZN thing going. I went to what was then the University of Natal and studied a Masters in Agricultural Economics. After that, I was in the public sector. I worked at the National Department of Agriculture, which is now Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. And then I went into the organized agricultural space, firstly in the sugar industry, working at cane growers for 10 years. And for the last 23 years, I've been with the Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa. We represent growers not only in South Africa, but Eswatini, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia. And most of our work is around exporting of fresh citrus fruit. Second biggest exporter in the world at 2.5 million tons. And where we interact with the public sector most is in terms of market access. In other words, getting our fruit into the different markets around the world. And then in logistics. And logistics is really critical for us to move that volume of fruit through South Africa, through the ports and into the markets overseas. And then obviously in transformation in terms of getting better black grower representation in our industry. That's my introduction. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you very much for making that short and sweet. So we all acknowledge that PPPs offer significant potential for improving public services by leveraging the strengths of both the public and the private sectors. However, they also present unique challenges that need to be carefully considered. So in that respect, I have a number of questions which I would like to put to the panel. And these are, the first part is the individual sort of question part. Question number one goes to Advocate Matisa. Advocate, I would like you to really unpack for us the concept of PPP. What is the legal definition or understanding of PPP in the South African context? And is there a clear understanding of the different roles of partners and stakeholders in a PPP arrangement? If not, what could be done to mitigate misunderstanding? And then finally, give us a comparison of PPP practices in South Africa, drawing on your experience of PPPs in other countries where you are involved in PPP advocacy and training. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I'm sure you can unpack that for us.
Thank you very much, Prof. That's like you say, it's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll try to break it down as far as I can, and the other panelists can also come in. In terms of the South African legal landscape, we do have, unlike other countries where there is no legislation that regulates PPP, in other countries, it's just more like another form of a contract, which is taken more like a concession contracts, and there's no specific legislation that deals with PPPs. In South Africa, we do have a specific legislation. So our PPP framework is, for lack of a better word, codified, which means that there is an act that regulates it. It's not a standalone PPP act as in other countries, like where you go to Kenya, you have a PPP act, Tanzania the same. In South Africa, it's more a subsidiary legislation, not meaning that in terms of binding or in terms of significance. It just simply means that you don't have a named act per se. It comes in form of regulations, which were issued by the National Treasury, I think way back in 1990, 2000. I'm not too sure about the dates, Prof. You would forgive me, but it was around 2000. That's the Treasury Regulation 16 of the PFMA. So you have that being the regulations that regulate our PPP market or our PPP activities in the country. From a best practice point of view, you would find that it is recommended from APMG, which are the custodians of the PPP body of knowledge, which is the global standard for PPP knowledge. They recommend that PPP legislation or framework, because we take it as the framework because that's where you get the roles and responsibilities, the governance, the institutions, and the different role players that are involved. They're all defined in the regulation. Their suggestion or their wisdom is that you don't develop it outside the projects. In South Africa, I think we took a different view, because if we say if the regulations were published in 99, 2000, somewhere there, that's like how many years? That's, I think, less than 10 years from 1994. So it means that at that stage, we had not tested them per se. So you would find that from a practical point of view, we've got PPP. The first round of PPPs are only coming to maturity in the next 3-4 years. The prisons being one, the Mangaung prison, and the one in Limpopo, I think they were awarded 2001, 2002, over a 25-year period. So the first 25 years, I think the first one is ending 2026, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not very sure about the dates, but it's 2-3 years from now. So it's only after that we have had a project that we can say we've had a project that has run the full cycle from inception up until to hand over back to the government using the regulations. Let's then go back to our regulations. Let's see what has worked and what has not worked. Already there's quite a lot of talk, especially with the prisons PPP, with the recent headline of the, what can I call it, Prof? But the Thabo Bester case.
Thabo Bester, yeah.
Yes. From our colleagues on the virtual desk, Thabo Bester escaped from a PPP ran a prison. So it brought the issue of PPPs in the forefront to then say, how effective are PPPs? What are the lessons that can be learned? And it's going to be a very interesting case study to then get lessons from going forward. And also, it also then tells us that is it a one-size-fits-all? We can have a PPP for M4 or for the highways, Joburg to Maputo. Should it be the same approach when it comes to things like security? Because prison security and things like that. At which level must government retain control of? And at what degree can government or public sector go in handing over operations to a private sector? What are the risks there? So I think that those are some of the lessons that have been learned. And as of April, the last time I was following, I think the government, through the Ministry of Correctional Services, had issued a notice to then terminate that contract because the private sector had failed to comply with its contractual obligations. But the question is, if the Thabo Bester case had not come to the public forum, would government have had the capacity to pick up this failure to comply with contractual obligations, or it's only being picked up now because it's in the public eye? So those are some of the questions that are very topical in my line of space, being a capacity development and a institutional development practitioner. I think these are very tough questions that I think going forward, the South African legal framework can then pick up on to then say, in terms of management of PPPs, what can government learn from such experiences? All right. I also wanted to speak a little bit in terms of contract management, coming from a contract management background. It also comes back to your question about the definitional elements of a PPP. The definitional elements is that a government transfers a significant risk to the private sector for the development, finance, construction, operation, and maintenance of a normally infrastructure that is normally regarded as public infrastructure. So this could involve roads, this could involve hospitals, this could involve education, schools, prisons. It's one of them. This is infrastructure that is normally regarded as public infrastructure being temporarily transferred to a private party. It's very important to note that it's not the ownership. According to South African legislation, the ownership still remains a government's responsibility. So that is why, even if using the Thabo Bester case as a case study, when things happen, people did not go to the contractor or the consortium or SPV that is running the prison for the 25 years. Questions were asked at the Minister of Correctional Services, because the understanding is that legally, even though there's a consortium that's running it for 25 years, the government still owns the facility. So I think that that's something that we need to also then note, that on a PPP, ownership is not transferred. So it's different from privatization, because in privatization, ownership is transferred. But in this case, ownership is not transferred. It's only the obligations that are the operational obligations, but accountability from a legislation point of view and from a legal point of view, government remains the legal owner of the infrastructure, even during the PPP period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that really contextualizes the whole discussion. And obviously, as an academic, one is always inclined to want these definitions and clarifications, and you've done that in a very succinct but framed manner. So we appreciate that, and yes, definitely, Bester's case is on everybody's mouth, and we await the outcome. My next question is to Dr. Salane. And Dr. Salane, as a specialist in the area of PPP and from your own experience at the City of Tshwane Metropolitan Municipality, can you give us a sense of the areas in which PPP opportunities exist, number one? And then secondly, how does the public gain information about these opportunities and be able to access them? So if you can just unmute and take on that.
Okay, thanks very much, Prof. Maybe I need to anchor my response in that PPPs, as they are they involve a number of things, as advocate have indicated. So it will be services, it will be goods, and all those. And as a municipality, we are a basic service provider, kind of. So and the PPP, as the National Treasury defines it, and that was the challenge which they've just resolved recently, was what without, for lack of better word, what I'll call a true PPP. So if you look at the examples of the Mangaung, the prison, the Gautrain, all those, it's a 25, 30 year kind of commitment. But there are other, the world is becoming flatter, and what has happened is there are other projects which don't fall categorically clear as the National Treasury guidelines were pointing. So that's some of the things which I want to highlight, and where we participated. For instance, in our housing projects, we did the thought review housing project. We did with APSA. We did the Olivenhout Bosch, and so those ones are not. They don't tick all the boxes as the regulations put it. So I wanted to bring that distinction between the normal tick a box PPPs and the other ones. So within the city space, we for instance, the building we use as our administrative hub, where the city manager and the mayor sits, it's a PPP project, and it's a normal PPP project which National Treasury approved. It went through the approval process as required by the National Treasury. And then we also have the fleet management contract. It's a PPP one. So those are the opportunities for PPPs which we use. But as I indicated, for instance, we do roads, we do water, sanitation. And that is, for instance, when you look at the housing space, it's linked to housing delivered. And those projects were not ticking all the boxes which National Treasury will require. And I indicated that the world is becoming flatter, and then which means the services which are provided by the private sector, by the public sector, you might find now the private sector providing tools. So now you go to the post office, although it's a government entity, you'll find that you are able to renew your license, not only to take and post your mail. If you go to the banks, you are able to be issued with your passport and your identity document, which normally it's a government responsibility. So you see the world flattening in terms of the services and that. So those are partnerships which are happening, which we should recognize as well. And the National Treasury has taken heed of that, and then they are addressing those with that distinction that these are other kind of PPPs as it were. The other opportunities, how do we advertise? We normally advertise through your normal bulletins, tender bulletins, and people then are able to participate. But there's an opportunity as well where, for instance, we have packaged all the projects within the city, and then we called firms to say, these are the projects within the city. If you are interested, please bid on these ones. So that's one way we will also do advertise the project. The other opportunities, and it happened in a number of projects, more especially in housing, is, and this is, there's an historical factor. For instance, in housing, you find the city doesn't have a land available to develop housing. Then a private sector body will come to the city and say, I own this portion of land, these hectares, And I would want us to go into partnership and deliver housing, and we negotiate from that basis that this company has land. For instance, if you look in a case of APSA having land in Olivenhoek, they came to us and we negotiated in that line. It happened in the city of Joburg, so it's not confined to the city of Tshwane. If you go to the city of Joburg, the private sector owned the land where Cosmos City is being built. So those kind of things is that the point I'm driving home is that there are permutations in terms of how do you initiate a PPP. So it could be the city saying, we have this project, we have packaged them, come and bid, and we advertise them. And then sometimes the private sector say, we have a land portion, we can contribute this into these partnerships. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think one realizes that there's a lot that one doesn't know, but this is very informative, and I'm hoping that our audience are also taking note of this in terms of the opportunities and the various permutations. Thank you very much, Doc. Let me now go to Ms. Raghavan, and we did discuss earlier on that the questions may not be directly relevant to or directly related to your mandate, but you're free to reformulate and give us a sense of what you are doing based on the topic that we have at hand. So my earlier question had been that why is PPP important in increasing our economic productivity? And does the private sector understand what PPPs really are? And are there expectations about PPPs that are not unreasonable, that are not reasonable? As you respond, Ms. Raghavan, I would also like to get Mr. Chadwick sort of online just to see if he has got comments on what you say. So please go ahead, Ms. Raghavan.
Thank you, Prof. And I hope that the line is much better in terms of hearing me. Apologies for having some issues earlier. I've just switched devices, so I hope that I'm more audible this time round. So, whilst we don't necessarily deal with PPPs from a perspective of private-public partnerships in a true sense of the way it's legislated and the custodian being the National Treasury, but as a national government department, there are some elements that obviously impact on the work that we are doing itself. And so when we look at private-public partnerships, in the way that we engage is obviously persuading or convincing private investors to come and invest in the country, to place manufacturing facilities in the country, so that indicators like the job creations, indicators like the investment attraction and the levels of investment that can increase. And of course, all of these impact on government services or on public sector services, because whether it is working with a national department, or whether it is working with a provincial government department, or whether it is working with a local government department, there are certain principles that are underlying in terms of expectations by the private sector and expectations by the public sector. And so whilst it's not necessarily a PPP, but when you look at key enablers to be making a conducive environment in which to operate, you would need public-private partnerships in terms of infrastructure as a key enabler to be able to not only have manufacturers manufacture core products or key products, but to be able to not only use the domestic market, but export into the other markets. And I think this links on, on the country strategy of being an investment export-led type of country and utilizing all the different partnerships. And so therein lies, and I'll go back to expectations, because in the way that you perceive the services, so it becomes about building the trust, it becomes about building the relationship, and those things, like a public private partnership are much over the long term and are key to be able to be having investors or companies that are dealing with different departments to be able to build that trust and build the confidence that these particular actions or these particular activities or these particular components can be delivered by government based on whatever the parties agree to. And so just like a contract that's impacted or affected in a PPP, it is and does become a contract of engagements, a contract of being able to provide these particular services in a particular way, in a particular time frame, so that from a cost-effective mechanism, that those particular deliverables can also be met itself. Then it comes to the capacity building, and so whilst you are working with these particular institutions and whilst you're delivering on the services, you are also learning about these institutions and they learning from you, which then builds part of what we want to build is a capable state. But you can only build a capable state is when you get involved in these activities to be able to understand not only the product, not only the people, but the processes that are aligned to this. And so in doing this, you also become better at what you do, which again builds in the element of trust amongst parties, and it's a multiple pronged approach that we take, because we don't only engage with the investors, but we also engage with sister departments, we engage with the different spheres of government to be able to have that full value chain and that full integration of that value chain that can be delivered. And a key aspect, again, whether it's private-public partnership, I think it's key to any dialogue or any conversation is the communication. And being able to package, being able to profile, being able to position, being able to advocate in a particular way the benefits, and being able to put those in writing and then demonstrate through those benefits of what can and cannot be achieved. And be frank and open in those discussions right at the the forefront or right at the beginning, so that you can build on those capacities that may be required, and you can also leverage on capacities and strengths that you already have to be able to again optimize on those public-private partnerships that you want to have, not only in the best interest of a department, but also in the best interest of the country and in the best interest of the people within the country itself. I'll stop there, Prof. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And let me just say, if colleagues on the panel would like to comment on what's been said, at the end of the presentation by Mr. Chadwick, we will allow some discussion of what has just transpired. And then I'll come up with questions which are questions of a general nature, which anyone on the panel can respond to. And with that, I would like to move on to Dr. Bengu. Dr. Bengu, please, would you come on board and make your contribution?
No, thank you very much, Chair. As you will have heard during the intro, I started going into this. The reality is that South Africa doesn't have, it can't train enough health practitioners that we need, which means even in a future energy dispensation, we will need private sector practitioners to be part of the system. It doesn't have as many hospitals that we need, which also means that in the private sector, in the future, we will have to use private sector, as we've seen during COVID. But the point I'm driving at is that one would like to see a situation where this public-private, for now I'll just limit myself to the hospital environment because there's history there, that one would hope to see a very effective program that leverages on sort of private sector from the PPP perspective, purely because we just don't have enough. And there's very poor history on how satisfactory our facilities are in terms of managing patients. But the history that we have is suggests that something is not working. And I would love it if Advocate Mutisa, for example, would to just give a sense of where we're getting it wrong. There is case study one, is the Inkosi Albert Lutuli Hospital. Inkosi Albert Lutuli Hospital is a teaching hospital in KZN, so it's only referred cases that go in there. You can't just walk straight there. It was built on triple P basis, and in the end, government will take ownership of the facility, but there's a private sector player. By all standards, it has won awards, international awards, on really just was the first paperless hospital on the continent. So there's no question that the model in delivering a high standard facilities there. But if one understands the issues, they relate to how tight the contracts are, to the extent that the government doesn't really have much leverage to use the facility, where you are looking at cases where there is increased demand. They are very tight contracts regarding how many patients can be had, even if there are intermittent surges, because the cost component is absolutely, as I understand it, it would be too much in terms of penalties. So this is a case study of a hospital that infrastructurally is among the best in the world. But how is our contracting if, for example, there is no room to play around with the with occupancy rates when there is a need? And then the following case studies are cases where the model hasn't worked to the extent that they have been reversed. This is a joint venture between Netcare and the Eastern Cape Department, where the Somerset Hospital, in Settlers Hospital in the former Grahamstown, Makanda now, but also in Port Alfred, that hasn't worked, it has been reversed. And then also Netcare with Pelonomi in the Free State, and also Netcare across the border with formerly Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Lesotho, and now it has been in the media that relationship also doesn't work. And it's not that I have any particular issue in that case. It's just that if one looks at these cases, they clearly are a hospital group that believes in triple Ps. That's why they're obviously coming up so often. They have a history of working with the NHS in England, so it's clear that it's their strategy. But the question is, what is it? We need to find what is it that's not working. If there are players that, personally, before I forget, when I worked at Clinics Hospital, I commissioned the hospital, Palaboro Private Hospital, which was part owned by the Clinics Health Group and the Limpopo Department of Health. It also didn't work. So the interest that I would like to generate is really just to find out what is it that's not working. Because you can't question the government partners in terms of demonstrable success in running their operations, but what happens when these partnerships are in place? I wish I had the answers, because again, it would seem, if one looks at what is published in the Lesotho case, is it down to financial issues? Is it down to political pressure? where operationally it does seem like the hospitals are showing good outcomes. But questions like, oh, well, does the budget, can we afford the entire budget going in one direction? So for me, I think I don't have answers, but I have questions as to what needs to happen for this to work, simply because a successful universal health coverage in South Africa depends on a functioning private sector in partnership with government. And there are various levels of possible partnerships here. The one in Albert Luthuli I'm using is obviously a build, operate, and transfer model. Others could very well be, should Life or Mediclinic or clinics or Netcare run Baragwanath Hospital? This is not to say the hospital there is transfer of ownership. It's a question of, should this hospital group bring in its management team and run the hospital for a fee? So those are the models that we should be thinking of broadly. And this is not the hot ideological issue of giving out public facilities, but it's really management. As I said, I would love Advocate Natiza to just comment if he has insight into what did work with these models, because I would like to believe we need to find a solution. Thank you.
Maybe we should allow the advocate to give a comment. Please, advocate, if you, I see you got your hand up, so please go ahead and give some kind of response.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thanks a lot, Doc, as well. My view is that when it comes to PPPs, it's a partnership, private and public. So it's basically finding the middle way, a win-all, a win-all approach. And once that balance is lost, there's no partnership to talk about. It's a partnership. Others call it, it's more like a marriage, for lack of a better word. But in my training courses, I'd like to refer to it as a bird with two wings. And each wing must flap equally to the other wing. No one wing is stronger than the other, or no one wing should benefit from the other. And from a private sector point of view, the project needs to be able to pay back. It's an investment opportunity for them. For you to leverage on it, it's a private sector putting in their money as an investment to say, if we put our money into this hospital, are we going to recoup enough returns from operation of the hospital to cater or to cover our investment that we put in the construction and the operational cost for that hospital, and still get a dividend from our investment or a return on our investment. So the project needs to have a return on investment on the private sector. But on the public sector, this is public infrastructure or a public service. It also needs to deliver value for money at the end of the day. And if value for money is lost from a public sector point of view, by no means such relationship should, if it cannot be adjusted or amended, there should be ways that the public sector can find or extricate itself from such a situation where there is no more value for money being benefited. So without the specifics, Prof and the panel and our audience, it's a contract. So from a public sector point of view, if value for money is lost, it's not always that all terminations are bad. But if there's a justification that government is not drawing value for money in such a relationship, by all means, government should be able to, the public sector should be able to pull out, because the other party won't be fulfilling their obligations. And then on the private sector point of view as well, if the project is not commercially feasible or viable, as it was envisaged during the feasibility stage and during the project preparation phase. And the numbers or the business, it's not making business sense, because from a private sector point of view, it must make business sense for them to operate the facility or to remain in the relationship. So if the project is not making enough returns to be able to cater for its debt that was raised for its construction, and to provide for the operational expenditures and the returns on the investors, it also makes the project to find itself in a very awkward space, and termination or discontinuation could also happen. But in this specific one, I don't have the specifics. But just also on a general point of view, sometimes you'd find that with PPPs, we tend to normally look at the whole bundled approach, where we say design, finance, operate, maintain, and transfer. Sometimes we can do an unbundled approach, where government builds the infrastructure, because I think with hospitals, both there's a shortage of infrastructure, and like you indicated, there's a shortage of staff, which then impacts on the clinical services. So it could be that you can do a PP, you can have service PPPs, where the infrastructure belongs to government. That way, it reduces the cost of the PPP, because the private sector is not responsible for putting in an investment for infrastructure development. So the fee that government will now be paying to the private sector is greatly reduced, because the infrastructure would have been put up by the state. But the challenge is, does the state have the budget to put up that infrastructure? So that could also be a challenge. So in closing, without making it a dialogue, Prof, I think we have two problems: in infrastructure, shortage of hospital health infrastructure, and then we also have a lack of quality health service delivery. So I think in the health sector, if the captains in that sector or in that industry can look at an unbundled approach to say that, okay, even in the existing hospitals, we are having challenges. So maybe in the existing hospitals, have PPPs for service delivery only on the clinical services. And then where we have areas for infrastructure development, then the PPP can then just look at the infrastructure development, and then maybe come up with there are many variations, variation on the operational side. But if we bundle it, there could be options or candidates for a bundled approach, but they can also be, I think there should be space for unbundling the services to make them more viable for the private sector, and ensuring that value is delivered to the general population. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I think I saw a hand there. Is it Dr. Salane that wants to say something? Dr.
Yes,
Salane,
Prof.
please.
Yes, Prof. What I wanted to raise, it's around capacity, because what this talks to, as much as it talks to political interference and all those, performance of contracts relies solely on the contracting departments. Then the issue which becomes a challenge is the capacity from personnel, and which is a critical issue, because the private sector, when it does negotiate the partnerships, they go as a peg and hard as a peg, and you find from government side, it's only now you'll see with the State SA and the Department of Agriculture and Land Reform, it's one partner from the private sector. But when it comes to the public sector, it's different entities responsible for that. As much as the National Treasury looks at the overall, I think the Department of Public Works need to strengthen its negotiation team in terms of the outlay and implementation of PPPs. So without building capacity, as the the public sector, then it will always be a challenge to match the skill sets from the private sector. So that is basically that. But having said that, there are provisions from the, if you look at Regulation 16, it gives provisions that we have what we call independent socio-economic monitors, so that they look at the project as it's being implemented from the outside, with an outside perspective. And that a project it's unable to deliver, then it means there are a number of things which have gotten into it, because one is, if your transactional advisors were critical and good at what they did, it will have picked all these challenges, more so when they are repeating. So those are some of the things. The last point I want to raise is the partnerships allows for renegotiations. So as we're able to renegotiate terms as we move, especially when we find that there are challenges in this, and challenges comes in different forms and formats. COVID taught us a number of things, but as well as the trenching of budget towards implementation, we found that government has been paying a lot of contingency fees because of those performance challenges. So those are some of the things which I wanted to raise. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much for all that. Now, Mr. Chadwick, you have listened to all the other panelists, giving their perspectives. We haven't forgotten about you. In fact, we kept you for last because you are right in the trenches. From what we understand, you have a PPP that seems to be doing very well. So what I want to find out from you is, what lessons have you learned from your industry's participation in a PPP, and what advice would you give other entities contemplating PPP? So, Mr. Chadwick.
No, thanks, Prof. Yeah, I mean, we do work very closely with government on various platforms as a partnership. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of market access, it's essential that we gain more market access and that we get our fruit into all the markets around the world. So we do have a value chain roundtable, which is a partnership not only with the Department of Agriculture, but with all the different departments that deal with our industry, and then obviously all the other labor and other social partners as well in that value chain, and basically discuss all issues that are facing our industry. Prof, if I may, I'd like to just perhaps focus in on the latest PPP that's been hitting the press, which is around Durban Port, because one of our biggest issues is around infrastructure and the importance of being able to move our fruit out of the country. And I'd like to sort of focus in on your question on who does it benefit and how does it benefit those players. And the previous speaker spoke about an all-win situation, and we view the latest PPP in terms of Durban Pier 2 as actually being beneficial to all players involved. So if we look at why we say that, I mean, the first is labor. If you look at the South African ports, a World Bank report showed that we are the worst 3 operating ports, or amongst the worst bottom out of 350 ports around the world. And if we continue with the ports operating as they are now and at that level, the cargo basically moves to other ports. We see a very aggressive stance from Mozambique, Maputo, and also from Namibia in terms of trying to get cargo to their ports. And once you lose that cargo, it doesn't come back. So gradually you'll see the Durban port and the other ports would start losing cargo, and their efficiency and effectivity would get worse. So for labor, you are now, by bringing in a partner and ensuring that your efficiency increases, you would find that those jobs are then secured. And part of that PPP is the fact that all labor is retained in Durban Port and at the same terms and conditions as at present. The other impact on labor is the labor in Durban itself and the periphery around the port. All the sort of different small businesses that supply goods and services to the port precinct will now increase because the amount of cargo going through Durban will increase with greater efficiency. And then obviously all those different industries that use the port, the motor industry, mining and agriculture that goes through that port, all of those business sectors will become much more efficient and as such much more competitive, and will retain their presence in the different markets. So definitely from labor point of view, I see in the press labor's been coming out against the PPP, but in fact it'll secure their jobs and grow their jobs in the future, as far as we can see it. And then obviously from business side, it means that we become more efficient. It means that our products get to the markets a lot quicker. The shelf life is retained and our reputation is kept intact should the ports operate efficiently. And then from the government point of view, obviously it will tick all the boxes in terms of increasing employment. It'll lead to GDP growth and growth of the economy. And it will also transfer some experience and knowledge across from the private sector player in the port to government over time. As was mentioned earlier, the infrastructure doesn't change ownership. The port area is owned by Transnet National Ports Authority, TNPA, and is leased out to TPT, the Transnet Port Terminals. And TPT are the ones now that are going into a partnership with the Filipinos. And you know, they're the eighth biggest port operator globally. So we're not talking about somebody who's coming in that doesn't have the abilities and the experience and the track record to actually make a difference. They operate ports very efficiently all around the globe. So, you know, if we're talking about where PPPs can make a huge difference in terms of the economy and employment, etc., then this is a fine example of one that will bring about those changes. And obviously, the other two ports that are important are Kucha in the Eastern Cape, and that had been put out to PPP as well. So we're not too sure where that process is. Cape Town hasn't been put out yet, but obviously we're hopeful that will also, you know, if Durban Pier 2 is a good example of how it works, then hopefully that will they'll also look at Cape Town forward. So I think that's just an example of why we believe PPPs can work. Talking about the ports, but we talk about road and rail as well. You know, essential infrastructure for the industry. Yeah, thanks, Prof.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chadwick. Actually, I had picked up this thing about Durban Pier 2 on the news coming to work this morning, and I was surprised. I heard that the unions were not in favor, but I think as a Durbanite, you know, this is a big plus for us. So I'm hoping that everything works out, and definitely you have given us a perspective from the practical side of PPP, which kind of rounds up our discussion in terms of starting with the legal frameworks and hearing to our sort of learned friends, the advocate who has given us that, and then the various perspectives from different sort of contexts, and then ending up with a very sort of direct, almost case study of what's happening in terms of the Durban Pier 2. So this is quite useful. Now I have about 3 questions, in fact, which I'm going to put on the table, and any member of the panel should feel free to come in and give us their view. So the first one is, from your perspective, give us a sense of any risks that need to be taken into account when entering into PPP. And if possible, you can also tell us some ways of mitigating these risks. So I put that to any member of the panel that wants to have a go at it. Please feel free to unmute and come on board.
Yes, Prof, can I take it? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, no, that's right. Thanks a lot, Prof. I think that's a very pertinent question, and thanks for bringing it up. From my view, I think in risk management, first, it's agreed that almost everything is risk, but what then differentiates it is that how much do you understand this risk? If you understand it, then you are able to calculate it and then be able to come up with a risk mitigation or a risk response that is informed. So from my experience, the biggest risk has been going into PPPs without sufficiently understanding the subject matter itself, without having enough I think Regenesys is doing, having such a platform to talk about it, raising awareness about PPPs, having the basics understood by the general population, which are, at the end of the day, the major beneficiaries of PPP. When we say it should be value for money should be for the public sector. The public sector represents the general population, which is the public. Should be starting with public. If there's no value for money in the public, need to debunk that, because if you go into the PPP without sufficiently educating the public on the benefits of it and the value of money for that project should be most likely should be. So the biggest risk is the lack of information, lack of understanding, lack of awareness, and the solution is that let's have awareness, let's have capacity building, let's have training, let's talk about it more, and get the view and outcome beneficiaries of public service delivery, which is the general public.
Thank you very much for that, Advocate. May I have Mr. Chadwick now, please, Mr. Chadwick?
Yeah, perhaps another risk that can be identified is who's chosen as the private sector partner, and you know, there's a big concern about politically connected people or businesses being awarded these partnerships, and I guess that's something that needs to be, you know, taken into account in any of these partnerships. And I think, just once again, coming to Durban Pier 2, it's a Philippines company, so the whole geopolitics is not an issue around that. It's a company outside of South Africa, so you know, any other concerns around that specific partnership, I think you know, is unfounded, really.
Thank you very much. I think I have Dr. Salani's hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Prof. The good attraction about PPPs is that it recognizes emphasizes risk and as one of the key issues which needs to be addressed, and good enough it's addressed upfront. So when you negotiate, and that's where capacity comes in, and with the assistance as well of the transactional advisors, is that you need to identify the risks upfront and allocate upfront, so it doesn't change hands. So if you look at the commercial risks, commercial risk in most cases, in most projects, are taken by government, because it's about the government's way of doing things, and then they must take those risks as well. So if you were to look at what government puts on the table, then it will be the guarantees which goes with how to address those risks. I don't want to, maybe I need to go and look at how you should treat risks. There are risks which you can avoid, and there are those which you can allocate to the private sector, and all those, and you know how that goes. If you look at what could have happened, 26th of March 2020, the country stops. The president announces that everyone stops, goes home, and because we need to contain the spread of the coronavirus. If you haven't thought through of those, so government have to take that, because you, as for Gautrain, for example, you need to have what you call patronage guarantees. That's where they come into effect, because as government, you then now have to take such risks so that the partnership can work appropriately. If you look in the e-toll space as well, the Gauteng e-tolls didn't work as it was planned, and for a number of reasons, the public courts and all those things, so it couldn't go ahead as plans. And if there was nothing around assets performance risk, you just think what would have happened. So you can categorize, and there are risks which the private sector can easily take, and then the ones which the private sector need to take into consideration as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Bengu has his hand up. Please go ahead. Dr. Salane, is that a legacy hand or is it a new hand?
It's a legacy hand.
Oh,
yes.
Okay,
So
thanks.
Chair, I won't be long, but basically just to say, yeah, I think from the health sector, which is my industry, of course, the question is, where's the problem? Is it not sufficient due diligence studies done, or is it in the contract? Because we certainly know that the partners to government in all of the examples I cited are experienced operators that in their own right are successful. Unless I'm missing something. The issue is where are we falling short, and it ultimately has to be on the contracting side or maybe due diligence. But what also just confusing is that I do know that Treasury tends to be involved in the structure of these things, and we've always known Treasury to be among the best performing departments. So it's a mystery that needs to be solved, and I would hope that academic institutions like Regenesys take interest in exactly this type of problem from a research perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. Time is not in our favor. All things must come to an end. I would now like to ask panel members if they have anything to say, just maybe a minute, just to give us pretty much like you're summing up comments. If I can start with Mr. Chadwick. Mr. Chadwick, this time you're at the top. Please give us your closing remarks or comments.
Thanks, Prof. I think firstly, I think PPPs are going to be the future of the country. If we're going to grow the economy and grow employment, etc., we need PPPs and we need them to work. And to make them work, we need mutual trust. I think at the moment there's a bit of a trust deficit between government and industry, and we need that to be bridged and to have mutual trust. We also need shared goals and shared visions going forward, because that's essential in order to make these PPPs work. And we must be aiming for the same thing, otherwise they do come unstuck. And I think if we do work together like that, we will attract investment into the country. There's so much going for South Africa. We've got fantastic people here. I've been amazed at the entrepreneurial and innovative people that we have in business and in government. And I believe that if we all work together for these common goals, that we can definitely get to the sort of growth that we need in the country and start employing those people that desperately need jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And could I now go to Dr. Salani, please?
Thanks, Prof. and panelists, and thanks for this opportunity once more. I think from the discussions here, what comes and needs to be addressed is issues around capacity, more especially for the state, because it's critical when you look at what Dr. Bengo was raising around things falling through the cracks and all those. It's issues around what capacity do we have as government to do this. And I think as Regenesys and other institutions of higher learning, you have a duty to instill and to lobby and all those things, so that you can build capacity within state as well. So you need, as much as we are talking PPPs, see yourself in the picture as an institution of higher learning. You should be offering programs in targeting departments, municipalities, and all those, because you, as private, as public sector, we cannot match the capacity which is in the private sector. The second issue, which we didn't talk about, is the financing models. It's also critical to talk about those as well. I think because if you look, for instance, the funds coming, what government pays in some of the projects, it's higher, and considering the importance of that. So you will see the drive and all those. So the commitments in terms of the funds, you can see the equity and and all those. That also it tells you the importance of such a project in government. So those are some of the things we should be looking at as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Regavan, please, if you can.
Thank you, Prof. I think quite a few points have already been made, but I think your private-public partnerships are critical instruments and tools, if optimized in the right way, can really bring benefits to the country and in the best interest of the country itself. I think in the complexity in which PPPs are structured, and therein lies the unpacking of that, and key to that becomes the communication element. Key to that, the roles and responsibilities, and the building and the strengthening of capacity already there. So whilst we have pockets of excellence, I think it's to be able to leverage those pockets of excellence and utilize what's going really well, and then strengthen where there may be gaps to be able to have those win-win, for all parties concerned. And I think the last point that I want to make is, whilst you have multiple role players, multiple stakeholders involved, key to that is the communication element, but it's also the cost factor and the timeliness of execution of those particular projects. Because even when you take finance into account, like what was said, you also have the cost, and if you're spending more time than what was anticipated, it has cost implications, which can cause delays and can cause variations to what may have been decided originally in terms of the plan and the project itself. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel, and thank you for the insights that were provided by the other panelists that have enlightened and benefited my own learning in this particular field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Advocate Matiza, please.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, fellow panelists and the audience as well for this opportunity. I think in closing, it's clear that PPPs are now the catalyst for the most viable option in closing the infrastructure gap. There is absolutely no way government will be able to fund infrastructure for sustaining and even growing the economy. The example of Durban Port is one that has been given to say that there is an opportunity that government can increase foreign direct investment, increase the traffic and the competitiveness of the port. If Durban Port is more competitive, the trickle-down effect of that is very enormous. I think Mr. Chapman indicated to us that the construction phase only is going to be creation during the construction phase. Before the construction phase is the transaction advisory phase, which also offers opportunities for local transaction advisors to partake in that supply chain construction. Our construction industry also needs to start to have that shift to say the days of government tenders that will be paid over 18 months and so forth number. They need now to start getting geared to understand that if you're going to play in the infrastructure space, you better start developing your PPP expertise, because infrastructure is going to be delivered mainly by PPPs. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's not an event. It's a process. We learn from previous projects like the health project. We also learn from the present experience, and we continue. But going forward, that's going to be our financing institution, our local financing institution. One of the challenges that we have is that local financiers only start putting in interest when there's more or less like a foreign financier that has expressed interest, that is sort of verified or given weight to the project. So I think it's also a call to our financing sector to say that there's need to start looking at PPPs as an alternative way and viable way of investing their finances or investing their monies in order to get a good return. Our construction industry, we've said it, and also for our professionals in the public sector. So if you're in supply chain, project management, contract management, finance, it's important to start getting skilled in the PPP space, because PPPs are going to be the most, I think, preferred way of offering service delivery and infrastructure development. So in closing, I would say it's a clarion call for us, both in the public and private sector, to get ourselves aware of what PPPs are and get skilled in that area.
Thank you very much, Doc. Dr. Bengu.
Chair, when I last spoke, I assumed that was the closing comment. So all that's left for me is to thank you, my fellow panelists, and the audience. Thank you.
you very much. I would like to thank our panel and our audience on behalf of Regenesys School of Public Management, in fact, on behalf of Regenesys as such, for your participation on this very important topic. Our next webinar is going to be on the 29th of August, sorry, and the topic is skills development and capacity building in the public sector. Be sure not to miss it. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day and wonderful week. Thank you.